Hi, this next video in the Florence Art Tour will take you through the Duomo complex, so thinking about the different structures that you can visit and different sites that are part of the Duomo complex tour. So you can go to the Duomo itself, the cathedral, and there's different options there. You can go up to the Cupola, the dome on top of the Duomo. You need a time ticket for that. You can go to the Baptistry, you can visit the archaeological site under the Duomo, which was related to the earlier church Santa Reparata. You can visit the Campanile, the bell tower, and you can also visit the museum associated with the Duomo. So we'll go through those different options and give you some different tips and also some historical information. So jumping into the Duomo complex, you're going to have a couple of choices in terms of what you want to visit at the Duomo complex. So there's many different entrances and many different sites to see. In terms of visiting for free, really the main option you have is just visiting the Duomo itself. And Duomo again just means cathedral, not dome. So it's important to keep that in mind because many people hear the word Duomo and they think that it's just talking about the dome of the structure itself. The word for dome is cupola, so it's just important to keep that in mind. So if you want to visit the site for free, just plan on going to the facade of the church, so that would be the western entrance of the church facing the baptistry, and you'll generally see a line there whenever the church is open, whenever the Duomo is open. And so you would just line up there and wait your turn to go into the structure. You can go in and you'll be overwhelmed by the grand scale of the Duomo itself. Many people say, oh, there's not much to see there, but I just think seeing the size of the structure is really incredible. You can also see that transition from the late Gothic style into that Renaissance style where they start to whitewash all the walls. It's important to keep in mind that the church originally was a church dedicated to Santa Reparata. And this was an early Christian martyr who was an important saint in the city of Florence. But later on, the church was rededicated to Santa Maria del Fiore, so in honor of Saint Mary, the Virgin Mary. And it's important to keep in mind that Siena was also dedicating their church to the Virgin Mary, and that Siena was also rebuilding and enlarging their cathedral. So in 1294, the Florentines make the decision that they need to create a larger cathedral complex. The work is begun by Arnolfo di Cambio, who also was involved in the design for the Palazzo Vecchio, the redesign of the structure as more of a governmental structure, and he was also involved with the design for Santa Croce. Arnolfo died, however, in 1302, and the work really didn't progress until the artist Giotto, the artist and architect Giotto, began to direct the project, and then later the sculptor and architect Andrea Pisano. The Black Death, of course, would hit Florence and Siena in 1348, and this would cause devastating effects in terms of how these structures were progressing. There's an individual named Francesco Talenti who would come in later and who begins an even more ambitious expansion of the church. The old Santa Reparata is completely torn down rather than kind of building around it any longer, and the nave is completed by the late 14th century. The dome, however, is incomplete, and this, of course, is very embarrassing for the Florentines, and so there is a competition, and Brunelleschi is named the winner. So this dome is often referred to as Brunelleschi's dome. The dome was built between 1420 and 1436, and this is often discussed as so incredible that something of this grand scale could have been produced in 16 years. Because 16 years is pretty fast when we think about how long some buildings take now to build, and also how long some cathedrals in the late medieval period took to build, which was often many generations. Brunelleschi was in competition with Ghiberti on the commission or the kind of leading of the building of the dome and kind of finishing up the cathedral. And it's important to note that Brunelleschi and Ghiberti also competed on a baptistry doors, a set of baptistry doors that the commission ultimately went to Ghiberti, but there are different versions of this story, and so there's this very famous these competition panels that were submitted by each Brunelleschi and Ghiberti. Each one submitted a panel representing the sacrifice of Isaac, so seeing Isaac about to be sacrificed by his father Abraham. And it's important to note that although these panels really kicked off the Renaissance and kind of the time after the Black Death and kind of this many decades that followed where art production was a bit slower, these panels are at the Bargello, so you're not going to find them in the Duomo complex. However, you will see copies of those bronze doors, the doors that Ghiberti was ultimately commissioned to do. Those are on the south side of the baptistry, if I recall correctly, and then but Ghiberti's panels, the actual competition panels, are in the Bargello. So it's important to keep that in mind. And then the finished doors are in the museum, the actual doors and the copies are outside. Brunelleschi is also buried in the crypt of the Duomo, so that's something to look out for. The dome interior, or the cupola interior is frescoed. So be sure to walk all the way down to the end of the nave and have a look up at the dome so that you can see these incredible Last Judgment frescoes by Vasari and Zuccari. We also have a fresco of Dante before the city of Florence. This is an important reminder of the importance of Dante as a literary figure, his prominent placement within this important both civic and religious structure. And then there's also two significant frescoes, the monument to Sir John Hawkwood and the equestrian statue of Nicola da Tolentino. So two important individuals who are memorialized in these frescoes, although not in fully sculpted form, kind of in this trompe-l'oeil or kind of tricking the eye fashion, and recorded on the side of the Duomo, of the cathedral. So it's really very lovely to just walk around this space and just kind of revel in its scale and also some of those details along the wall. And one time I just ran into a student there, an old student that I had, so be sure to take your time and enjoy the space. It also tends to be cool in the summer, so you can enjoy that as well. So other sites to see, just be sure to, if you do decide to get a ticket, if you want to climb the dome, you do need to get what's now known as the Brunelleschi Pass. So at the time of this recording, there are 3 different passes that you can purchase. The Brunelleschi Pass allows you to visit all the monuments of the Piazza del Duomo with 1 ticket that's valid for 3 days. So you can visit the dome, and you get a specific time that you need to climb that dome, and you cannot miss that time. You can visit the Campanile, the bell tower. You can visit the Baptistry. You can visit the museum and the archaeological site of Santa Reparata. With the Gelato pass, which is kind of a lower level pass, you cannot visit the cupola. You cannot climb the cupola. And so with this pass, you can visit the Campanile, the Baptistry, the museum, and Santa Reparata. And then with the Ghiberti pass, you can visit the Baptistry, the museum, and Santa Reparata. So if you're not interested in climbing and you don't want to go to the cupola and you don't really want to go to the Campanile, then the Ghiberti pass is really the way to go. And if you're interested in going to the museum, if you're interested in archaeological sites, then go with the Ghiberti pass. But if you're interested in climbing and if you really want to go to that cupola where you'll have the incredible views, definitely pick that Brunelleschi pass. So it's very important, if you pick the Brunelleschi pass, go to the Duomo at the time of your climbing. So you would head up to the north side of the church and you will line up, and then at the time of your climbing, you will head up the stairway. It's over 400 stairs, and you'll just go along the side of the Duomo. Then you will walk along the interior of the cupola itself, so you'll really get up close with some of those wonderful frescoes done by Vasari and Zuccari of the Last Judgment, and then you head up the side of the dome. So the great innovation of Brunelleschi's dome is that it is a double shell dome. You have these 2 shells that have chains kind of holding everything together, and also ribs that act as a stabilizing feature. Brunelleschi also incorporated a herringbone pattern for the bricks, and you'll notice this as you're climbing up, which is just really wonderful to see. And then there's also lots of debate in terms of other patterns that may have been used to help guide the curvature of the dome. So what's interesting about the Florentine dome is that it's on an octagonal base, and this was an added complication that Brunelleschi had to deal with. If we compare it to, for example, something like the Pantheon in Rome, which is on a circular base, this is something that's going to make it a little more challenging for Brunelleschi to complete his project, and that's why it tends to be a little bit more kind of vertical in its orientation. It's pushing that weight down, and then you also have that lantern on top, which kind of keeps the dome from wanting to splay outward or peel outward. So you have this lantern, and that's why you'll come out on the top and have a wonderful view of Florence. The Campanile, designed by Giotto, you can also climb that. You're not going to have as clear of a view. It's also over 400 feet in terms of climbing, and it doesn't require a reservation. So you just go and you climb it when you have time to do that, if you do have the Brunelleschi Pass or the Giotto Pass. Originally, the Campanile had a much more Gothic top portion to it, which had those kind of pinnacles and much more of those pointed arches, although you do see that in kind of the design of the Campanile below, but they squared off the top of the Campanile eventually to create a different look as the architectural style progressed into the Renaissance. If you get any of these passes, you will be able to visit the Baptistry. And so the Baptistry is just to the west of the church itself. And so you can go over to the Baptistry. It's this octagonal shaped building, and it has those bronze doors on 3 of the sides. So be sure to go around and enjoy looking at them. 2 are designed by Ghiberti and 1 by Andrea Pisano. Inside, you'll see some wonderful mosaics along the ceiling, and that's really what's extraordinary to go and see in this particular building. You'll be able to see those mosaics. You'll be able to see the Last Judgment. And so it's really wonderful to go in and see that, as well as stories of John the Baptist, Adam and Eve, and other stories related to kind of early creation. These are going to be earlier artworks, kind of earlier than the Renaissance. We might call them kind of late medieval, proto-Renaissance artworks that were created. So it's a really nice way to see that progression from the late medieval into the Renaissance as you're moving through the Baptistry and then into the Duomo. So, for example, the frescoes by Vasari and Zuccari, those are really taking us into the late Renaissance, whereas looking at the ceiling of the Baptistry, that is really focused on the proto-Renaissance or late medieval period. All right, so we've covered visiting the Cupola, the Duomo structure itself, the Baptistry, the Campanile. It's important to note that you also can visit Santa Reparata. So you can visit this kind of archaeological site, which is going to be on the south side of the Duomo. So be sure to look for that entrance near the Campanile, and with any of the tickets, you'll be able to visit that site. It's also important to note just one final mention of a free way to visit the Duomo. On Sunday, of course, the Duomo holds masses. It is a Catholic church, and so if you are interested in attending Mass, you would also enter from the south side. You would say something like Per Santa Messa. You're interested in going to the Holy Mass, and you would be welcomed into the church. Oftentimes, it is held in kind of a side, like in the transept or in a side chapel of the church, just because the church is so massive that it really isn't necessary to have everyone seated in the main area of the church in order to have your kind of every week, your weekly Sunday Mass. But if that's something you're interested in, just be sure to enter from that side entrance. Don't try to enter from the facade entrance where tourists visit during the week. So that's important to keep in mind. All right, moving over to the museum itself, there are many things to see in the museum because so many of the things on the cathedral are actually copies, because so many of them are kept safe in the museum. The museum has been recently renovated. It's wonderful. It has air conditioning, and it's just beautifully designed. So I highly recommend it. And it really takes you through the history of the cathedral. I think it's great if you can visit the cathedral, then go to the museum, then go back to the cathedral to kind of notice what you've just seen. So if that's possible, I highly recommend it. So you'll enter into the museum. If you need to use the restroom, it's a good time to do that. Don't wait until you've already exited the turnstiles because they will not let you back in, and you will need to use the restroom at the cafe that's near the exit to the church. You'll see a model of the Duomo's medieval facade, and then you'll move into a large hall where you will see a recreation of an early facade of the Duomo itself before the facade that you see today was added, which is a much, much later facade. In this main room, it's very impressive. Occasionally they have music concerts in there, and you'll see a design or a sculpture by Arnolfo de Cambio called the Madonna of the Glass Eyes. So she has these very luminous eyes. You will also see Donatello, St. John the Evangelist, with his typical interest in kind of that ancient Greek and Roman style, heavy drapery, long beards, interest in hairstyle, interest in kind of portrait-like features, showing us that connection to the Roman tradition. You will also see Ghiberti's Gates of Paradise. These include stories of Adam and Eve, Noah, Jacob, Moses, David, Cain and Abel, Abraham and Isaac, Joseph and Benjamin, Joshua and Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, as well as a self-portrait of Ghiberti on the door on the left-hand side. So obviously those are all stories from the Old Testament. These are gilded, very luminous doors, extraordinary to see. There are also the north doors done by Ghiberti and the south doors done by Andrea Pisano. So I may have inverted those earlier in the discussion. So north doors are by Ghiberti. These were the competition. These were the doors he was given the commission for these when he competed with Grunoleski in that very famous Sacrifice of Isaac competition. And then again, the south doors done by Andrea Pisano. There are some wonderful sculptures to see in this museum. So there's the Mary Magdalene by Donatello, dating to around the 1450s. This shows us the Mary Magdalene as she has retreated to the desert, into the wilderness, where she was said to have hardly eaten, where her body has really been reduced to kind of this emaciated form, where her hair has grown to cover her body. And she's really given up kind of the material pleasures of this world and is clearly moving on to a more spiritual world as this close companion of Christ and kind of following in the way of Christ as she removed herself from the world. There are many relics that can be seen in the museum. As you move along, you'll also see Michelangelo's Pietà, not the famous Pietà of the Vatican, so it's important not to get those confused, but a much later Pietà, where we see the body of Christ in this dramatic serpentine pose, kind of moving from one direction to the next. He's supported by Mary Magdalene and by his mother, the Virgin Mary, as well as Nicodemus, who is said to have been there at the crucifixion, and he has the portrait features of Michelangelo. So it's a very emotional work. It's kind of in different states of finish, so it's very interesting to walk around and see the areas that have been left highly polished and those that have been left kind of unfinished, seeing that working mode of Michelangelo. And also it's just showing kind of that change in his style from the high Renaissance early in his career when he's in his 20s to one of these final works of his career. As we move up the stairs, you'll see a gallery of all the decorations for, or many of the decorations for the Campanile. These include different panels that are in this kind of hexagon shape, and then also additional sculptures by Donatello, again, highlighting that interest in that kind of Greco-Roman heavy drapery with portrait-like features. There's a wonderful gallery dedicated to kind of the study of the cupola, the building of the cupola, and Brunelleschi himself. So you can see Brunelleschi's death mask, and you can also see models for the cupola and for its lantern, and also some of the kind of tools that were used. So these interesting kind of hoisting systems that were used for this particular structure. There's a wonderful gallery, in addition to this, featuring the choir lofts. So these were done by Luca della Robbia, as well as by Donatello. So you can see that kind of consistent involvement of Donatello in the creation of the Duomo and kind of the contributions to the Duomo. Then as you move through the museum, you'll also see a wonderful altar designed in silver, and then you'll also see the evolution of the overall exterior design of the church. So in particular, the facade is something that was added so much later in the 19th century. So this kind of dramatic period of time, or this long period of time that took place between the building of the cathedral from the late 13th century into the 15th century, and with designs in the 16th century as well, and then moving on to this kind of final finishing of the cathedral in the 19th century. There's also a wonderful kind of gift shop as you leave, and again, remember there's a cafe too. What are some of the other options to what are things to do and things to eat around this area? So a couple of recommendations. If you want to have a gelato, I recommend going to GROM, which is a chain, but has some great seasonal flavors. And I always had good luck getting gelato there during the day, late in the evening. So a great place to go. If you need to get any books in English, I highly recommend the Paperback Exchange. That's a great place to go as well. And then in addition to that, there's a hotel nearby called the Hotel Centrale. I haven't stayed there, but it has a great big lobby, so it's nice for groups. And also people I know who've stayed there have had a good time, especially if they want to stay very close to the center of the city. And then finally, there is a very inexpensive cafeteria that is called Self-Service Ristorante Leonardo. And I just recommend that if you want to have some good, simple food, if you are in a family with young children and you just want a place to just sit and rest, go there. Be sure that you don't get distracted by the other restaurants down below. You do need to go up the stairs, and then you'll just kind of go in a line with a tray, pick out some food. They have antipasti, they have pasta, they have main courses, they have desserts, tiramisu. You can get a big carafe of water with ice and kind of cool off on a hot day. So those are great options. So if you're looking for a gelato, a hotel, some food, or a book, you should be in good shape in the area around the Duomo. Of course, this is tourist central, so you just want to be a little careful when making your choices in this area. So I hope this information about the Duomo complex was helpful and you have all the information you need for your trip to the Duomo complex, or that you just enjoyed kind of touring around on the computer. So share your tips for your visit down below if you have any ideas, and keep an eye out for the next video about the Accademia.